Hello, my name is Helen Williams and I am a Senior Research Associate at Bristol University. And what this actually means is that I do research into possible cures for heart disease. I work mostly in the lab, but I also go to conferences and I also write up my work for publication and teach and supervise postgraduate students. So what does a typical day look like for me? First of all, it involves planning how I'm going to use my time for the day to try and fit in as many different experiments as I can into my work day. I do lots of different techniques in the lab, from growing cells in tissue culture to do experiments on, to analysing the samples that we get from those in lots of different ways. For example, I run out samples on the gel to separate them out and look for different proteins in our samples. And I also do qPCR to look for gene expression. I also do lots of different histological techniques, which means that we take our tissue sample and we embed it in wax and we cut really thin sections and then stain them to look at which structures we can see inside. And we also use antibodies to look at specific proteins, and this is called immunohistochemistry. And I have an example to show you. This is from a paper that I actually got published, and I have a picture on the cover, which was the best thing that ever happened. And inside here, you can see an example of what our staining looks like. So if I hold this up like this, this bit here is the whole vessel. You can see the ring of the vessel with the structures inside, and here you can see a close-up view of this, and the dark lines you can see are the lamina, the rings that go around the blood vessel, and here you've got the diseased part inside, and this is the bit where the diseased part is actually ruptured, and this is what was interesting for our paper. So what other professionals do I work closely with? We work with lots of different people across the university and the hospital. So obviously we have all different members of our team, up from the professor at the top of the scale. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and then there are students down at the bottom. We also collaborate a lot with the medics and also the teaching staff at the university. So with the medics, they are able to give us pieces of tissue from the patients that they're doing surgery on. So the medics are doing heart bypass surgeries, and to do that they take out the vein from the whole of the patient's leg, because they sometimes need to use the whole vein in order to bypass the arteries that the patients have got blocked up. But the bits that are left over from these surgeries, if there are any bits left over, they bring to us in the lab. And we're able to do lots of different experiments on these, from using them to make cells so that we can do loads of experiments on the cells that we make from them, to actually using the whole piece to do what we call a flow experiment, which is where we mount the piece of vein onto our flow apparatus, and then we'll flow liquids containing our drugs through them, and we can analyse what effect the drugs have on the structure of the vein. So what are the three best things about my job? Well, I get to do lots of different techniques. So basically it never gets boring, because I can do lots of different techniques and I can plan which ones I do on which days. So I can do whatever I fancy doing within reason on a certain day. I also work with lots of really smart people. So we have loads of really interesting conversations in the lab. Even if we're not talking about science, we'll always be talking about something really interesting. And the absolute best thing is that sometimes we get to go to conferences in some really great places. So over my career, I've been to a conference in Salt Lake City in America. I've been to one in Kyoto in Japan, and I've been to other ones all over Europe. And if we're super lucky, we get to stay in nice hotels, although that doesn't happen very often. I've also stayed in Oxford and Cambridge colleges and in really lovely rooms there, and gone to posh dinners there, which makes you feel like you're at Hogwarts. What are the two most challenging things about my job? I think probably the most challenging thing about my job is having to stay self-motivated. There's nobody who's really watching me and making sure that I do work, so it's really up to me to make sure that I'm staying productive and doing the things that I have to do. Even the more boring bits, like doing statistics, I obviously have to make myself do them. And a kind of downside that I think people should know about when choosing this as a career is that we're funded by charities on quite short-term contracts. So every 3 years, I basically have to reapply for funding and reapply for my own job and try and think of something exciting that the charities will want to fund every few years. What advice would I give to someone thinking about becoming a research scientist? I would say maybe start by reading some articles in journals like this. See whether you actually read them and think that's really interesting, that's something that I would want to do. Also try to get some lab-based work experience if you can, and then that way you can compare what people are doing in different sorts of labs and see if it's something that interests you. You can do the sort of research that I'm doing in a few different environments. So obviously I work in a university lab, but you can also do it in hospital labs. They do research, and also a pharmaceutical company. I would say the main advantage of academia, working in a university lab, is the amount of control and autonomy you have over your life and your project. That I choose my project, I control how it's run, and I have ultimate control over really what I'm doing in the lab. Whereas in a hospital job or a pharmaceutical company, you'll have less control, but you'll have more stability. Those jobs tend to be permanent. For a pharmaceutical company, it would be better paid. But having said that, you could be switched between projects as your manager sees fit. You won't have control over your projects. But most importantly, I would say if the idea of discovering something new that no one's ever done before is exciting to you, and if you like having to think of how to do things for yourself and how to solve problems, then I would say a career in research is definitely worth considering, and it's probably something that you'll find really exciting and stimulating.